Okay? My name is John Watson. I was a Grand Master of the Grand Lodge, New Brunswick in 2017 to 2019. I was married at the time. I was 57 years old when I came to Masonry. I was employed for a year before I retired in 1958. Or rather, I was 58 in 2004 when I retired. My journey in Masonry began probably years before that in my desire to become a Mason. I worked with a lot of men at the refinery where I worked, and they were Masons. A lot of them I knew quite well. I talked to them about it at many times, and not one would give me any information. So it piqued my interest, of course, and until I was near retiring, I was planning to retire. I was a shift work, so I felt I couldn't take part in something like Masonry at the time. But when I did, a shiftmate of mine, who was also a schoolmate in high school of mine, so I asked him many times, and he finally said to me, he said, "Are you really interested in Masonry?" I said, "Yes." He's okay, I'll get you an application. And the rest is history, so to speak. I went into Masonry. I guess I always knew the small community I lived in was 3 miles outside of St. John East in Colebrook, Glen Falls in particular. Small community, working class people, and there were Masons in my community at that time. I didn't know exactly what they did, but the elders of the community, the men, because all the community events we'd gather at, and I'd overhear some of the conversations of the men. And then what I learned about Masonry then was, oh, he got that job because he was a Mason. So I knew there was some kind of networking system, but it was not the reason that I joined Masonry. Anyway, here I am, and I do remember most of the officers of the 2 years that I was Grand Master. No need to me start to recite those names right now. Some of the issues I had during my term, it was the banister affair, stepping down the level at the close of a lodge. Basically, that was the only two that really comes to mind that I had any difficulty with. There was some tough times. We made some decisions that was not really popular at the time, but I'd rather not dwell on that. I'd rather dwell on the good things in Masonry. And the good things, and I could relate many, many stories, but I'm going to relate a couple of them to you here. Howard Lodge was a particularly favorite of mine to start with. I loved the idea that we had that building, that lodge room, was in that old house, the Steve's Museum. I just loved it. I always had I believe I should have been born many years ago because I do live in the past in a lot of these things. And I believe that was probably the closest we're going to come by having that lodge in the Steve's Museum, the part of that Steve's Museum, in that old house, the closer we're going to have what Masonry was really about many years ago in our earlier times. I loved it. I always thought it was good. Don O'Grady, the worshipful master of the time, was a good friend of mine. The first time, he gave me the first piece of good advice I had when I became Grand Master. And he says, just be yourself and you'll do okay. I never forgot that. Never ever forgot that. We had a lot of my happy times or good times are centered around Howard Lodge. There was a couple of incidents. One instant was Harold Toole, 106 years old. I first met him when he was, I think, 104 at the lodge in Howard Lodge. He was there one day. Man with a big booming voice, a grip, something like Bill Cole. Strong man at 104 years old. 106 years old. They called me and asked me, we're going to do a lodge. Harold can't come to lodge. So we're going to go take the lodge to him. He said, would you come? I said, of course I will. And so we trucked over to his house. His wife was 98 at the time. And Joe Link was the secretary of that lodge at that time. And he made a plexiglass mosaic pavement, 2 pieces. And he drug that along, and we set that up in the living room of Harold Toole's home, and we had the lodge. Well, I'll tell you, I just love listening to old folks talk. And he was something else to listen to. One thing I remember about Harold, he got stuck on a story right in Lodge. And just like I'm sitting here, and he got stuck, and he said, "Dear Lord, help me." And he sat right up, picked right up. I thought that was so emotional. It was very good. He's a fine man. We had everything centered for me around Howard Lodge, as somehow I felt akin to that lodge for some reason. The Bannister Affair, it was come from that lodge too. That wasn't really particularly nice, but I got past that. And I just moved on. And then another issue that I really enjoyed was visiting. Whenever somebody called me, I would love to visit hospitals, nursing homes, whatever. Bill Balser's father, he had an anniversary. And we went to, he was in a nursing home in Riverview. I went up there. The whole family, there was a big crowd there. It was a really fine, fine day. Mark Ouellette, he was a junior warden at the time. And he called me and he said, "There's a brother in the hospital in Fredericton. He'd like to give him a 50-year pin. He's not doing well. Could you come up for that?" I said, "Of course." I went up. His name was Merrithew, Brother Merrithew. He was a retired Mountie. So we went in, Mark and I. His family was there as well in the hospital. He was in bed. So we had the greatest visit you ever talked about. He told me, he said when he was a Mountie, and he was stationed in St. Stephen, and he said when he became a Mason, he and his partner would be out on patrol. And he said they'd be practicing the obligation while they're on patrol. I thought that's interesting. It's interesting because as a child, one of my ambitions in life was to be an RCMP officer. And I got all the way to the interview, and I thought I had it made, but I didn't. Anyway, that's life, another song. Those were good things. Those were really good times. I enjoyed myself really well. I wasn't a big visitor out of the jurisdiction. I saw a little value in it. I certainly didn't see value in the All Canada Conference. And one of the particular reasons I didn't see value in that was we went, we visited, you had nothing to do. My wife came along, of course, and she was busy all the time. I'm in a lodge room with nothing to do with a bunch of other folks similar to me. So we'd have the dinners or whatever. They were very nice, but we're done. We came back. We didn't even file a report. So there's no benefit that I could see other than visiting another jurisdiction. I think our efforts should be done in our own jurisdiction. And even more so, I think it should be done in our own lodge. I think we have to put more work towards our own lodge. So I don't believe visiting off-site out of the jurisdiction is necessarily good. And we do stress visitation in our lodges. You've got to visit. That's what the story is about Masonry. You have to visit. Masonry is, we're having some tough sledding here right now in some lodges. The lodges are going dark. Membership is falling, and if the declining membership is an indication of the poor health of the fraternity, we might be in bad shape. But I don't necessarily think it's the poor indication of the poor the health of the fraternity by the drop in membership is necessarily an indication of poor health. But I do think we should be doing something differently. One thing, the lodges itself, to wait the Grand Lodge does something or directs us may not be right. I think you have to defend yourself. I believe a lodge should be cohesive. I don't think it's so important to keep pushing on them to bring candidates in, particularly not now. If you've got a lodge less than 40, 30, in the 20s, bringing new people in isn't going to save that lodge. The lodge itself has to be saved, and we have to concentrate on the membership we really have. We have to work that. So we got to get back in the lodge. Forget about initiating members right now. That'll come. If you fix the lodge up, the lodge it'll just expand from there. So if every lodge fixed the lodge up, and that means, how do you fix the lodge? Well, we got to get back to some basics. In the basics, we have a very strong moral message in Masonry. We're not using it. What I see in Masonry is it's more of a social club. Remember, I think I said at the very beginning, I joined Masonry, or if I didn't say it, I mean I joined Masonry when I was 57 years old. I was ready to retire, and did retire in the year after. And I joined it thinking it was a men's social club. Once after getting into it, I found it wasn't. 20 years later, I believe it is a men's social club. And a social club, we got all kinds of those around. We don't need to have no social life. We don't need to have necessarily, we have to have a social life. But I think we have to, if we're doing Masonry, you've got to do it in the lodge. We're concentrating on spending or raising money. We're selling tickets. We're selling dinners. We're trying to encourage visitation to pay for a dinner so that we gain money for the lodge. That's an issue. But I think we should just concentrate on the lodge, forget about initiating people for some time, and get everybody that's there in the lodge back in the lodge. Retention's an issue. I don't think we have, I don't think there's any data on it. I'm sure there's no data. There wasn't 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and on what the retention rate is in lodges. So we have to fix that up. You can't fix that up by having a social night. Doesn't work. We've tried it. We've done all that. You can't fix up the membership by putting more people through. We've tried that. We're doing that. It's not working. Membership's still going down. So we've got an issue that we've got to deal with. And what I really believe is it's got to be fixed at the lodge level. That, what I'm saying is, we got to get together with the group that we have. If it's 20, 25, 15, 10, 12, whatever you got, get those men together and make sure they understand. Excuse me, they understand what we're about before we go into expanding. And then once we get everybody and get them regularly, and people will want to come to lodge. Excuse me. Right now, COVID was a bad thing. We all know that if the more often you stay away, the longer you stay away, it's for sure you're not going to want to come back. But COVID was a good thing to happen to us because it just illustrated some problems in Masonry. Those folks that stayed away because they had to, and they don't want to come back, they weren't getting much out of Masonry anyway. And why weren't they getting much out of Masonry? They came for some reason, and we should find out exactly what they want and things. But basically, the moral message we have, it should be very clear. I had, when I was traveling around the jurisdiction, I thought it was beneficial to travel around the jurisdiction. I loved it. I had some really good time. I felt I was making a point, but the message I had was always clear. It was the first things in Masonry, initiation. It's brotherly love, relief, truth. Next meeting, if after we've initiated a person, the senior warden and the worshipful master, the dialogue, and said, what come you here to do? To learn. Subdue my passion and improve myself in Masonry. 6 things. Each one of those are in order. Brotherly love, number 1. Relief, 2. And truth, 3. What come you here to do? Learn, number 1. Subdue my passions, 2. 3. And improve myself in Masonry. We have to stress those very same message. Another thing is, there's a lot of folks, a lot of senior people will tell you, along with visitation, you've got to view the world and all that sort of thing, and travel to learn and read everything you can about. Our library is full of big books down there that are still dusty that nobody's read in 100 years. When I traveled to Connecticut, New Hampshire, and all points in the eastern United States, they had magnificent libraries. And when I was at Grand Lodge, because I had little, to do, and I would go travel, or I would go into the libraries. I'd be the only one in the library. There were books there that 2 inches thick and 14 inches high on a shelf. Not a soul has read them in over 100 years. I'm really disappointed. It looks beautiful as a library, but they were of no value to you. There's only 3 books, in my view, that are worth anything and should be prescribed reading. This one, ritual book. This one, Constitution and Regulations, and the volume of Sacred, the Holy Bible. 3. Each one of them reference the other. Each one. And what do we do with these? Well, we make mention of the Holy Scripture, because in our opening and closing and such like that, and degrees, that's fine. But other than that, we don't. The Constitution and Regulations, we talk about once a year, and then it's put away. This one here, we use when we're doing a ritual, but we learn it for the guys that are doing the ritual. The folks that aren't doing the ritual don't read it. We're not even allowed to bring that in lodge. Silly, isn't it? When you go to school, you bring your textbooks. You go to the church, you bring your Bible. You go to university, you bring your material to study from. But we don't even have this with us. Why? Strange. So if I see a problem with Masonry, it's just that. We don't know what we're doing. We're not reinforcing what we're about. So if we get the small groups again, the 17, 20 people of your lodge, get them together and start illustrating this and talking about that, I really believe Lodge will improve. I'm actually going through a poor time right now with Masonry, because my interest is waning much because life's bearing down. I've got some issues, health issues. I've got health issues at home and such like that. So I'm not really keen right yet. But I was happy to do this little interview. Our historian asked me to do this, and I'm pleased to do that. And it did prick up my interest a bit more by doing this, because I had to think about Masonry. Most times of late, I go home and I don't think. But when Lodge Night nears, I start getting the bug again, and I'm interested. And but once I go home, the problems of the day, the problems that I have, they come back and I forget. So it is important. It is important. Masonry is a grand organization. And one more thing. I think we're fooled. We use these cliches. Masonry makes good men better. Guard the Westgate. We're better than them service groups. A notch better than them service clubs. We want to scrap that. I think that shouldn't even be part of our vocabulary. We shouldn't use that. That doesn't accomplish nothing. That doesn't bring more Masons in, and it certainly don't keep them. History's telling me that. I did have just recently, our secretary brought a movie to Lodge this month, the beginning of the month. And it was a fellow from Connecticut. And he was explaining in really good terms the prayer that we have at the 3rd degree. I never heard that before. I must confess. I never understood it before. And this fella, he explained it in simple terms. Each part of that, he broke it down. It was about a 15-minute film. I really recommend that, to see that, and we should have more of that, in particular for the other prayers. Because it tells you, it was actually the prayer was based on the old age, fitting, isn't it? But it was based on that, and it illustrated each passage in that prayer was a particular point about getting older, wiser, and looking forward to the afterlife, that type of thing. It was really worth it, and I'd love to hear the ones on the 2nd degree and the 1st degree. But the point is, there's some good stuff out there. We're not using it, and we do have to get. And I really believe the lodge. It's like the family unit. The family unit is what keeps you together. And if you do well in the family unit, it'll expand out, because your kids, their kids, and all that, and it goes that way. So the lodge is the same way. Right now, the lodge is, most of them, there's some really good ones, but most of them are rudderless. I would say. But I do thank our historian, Bill Cole, for the opportunity to speak here today, and I do wish the fraternity well. I thank you very much for listening to me.